Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Mr. News Art Class. It's great to see all of your smiling faces today. Today, we are going to be using half of a 9 by 12 sheet of paper, so that is 6 by 9. We are also going to use a pencil, a Sharpie marker, and an ultra-fine point Sharpie pen. We're going to begin by labeling our paper. After you have labeled your paper, we're going to use a regular pencil to create 6 different blocks in which we will be practicing our Zentangles. The first step for each of these blocks is going to be to create a different type of string. And the Zentangle term string just means any kind of line that you might get if you dropped a string on your paper. I'm going to show you 5 simple ways to make a string, and then in the 6th box we're going to leave it empty with no string. The first really easy type of string to make is a wavy string. The second type of string we're going to make is a simple curve. It's just like the wavy, except it only curves once instead of curving back and forth. The third type of string that we're going to create is what we call a closed loop. This is where we loop around and the line crosses itself. The fourth kind of string that we're going to make is what we call an open loop. And the fifth and final type of string that we're going to create is something that I call a bouncing string. And I call it that because we come down, hit an edge, and then bounce off at a really sharp angle. And you notice it makes a really tight little V here, a really sharp angle. And then again, we're going to leave number 6 with no string. Okay, now we're ready to put the pencil aside and move on to our Sharpie marker. And what we're going to do is pick one space to create a pattern in. On the first block, I think I'm going to do a pattern above the string. One of the simplest patterns you can make is just a repetition of shapes. I'm going to start by creating maybe 2 or 3 triangles. And notice that none of them actually touch any of the edges. They're just very close to the edges. Now I'm getting out the ultra-fine point Sharpie pen. And I can make some really tiny triangles in those spaces, filling those spaces with really nice, clean, small triangles. Now, the last thing I'm going to do for this pattern is I'm going to come and make little notches in some of the corners on the big triangles. I'm still using the ultra-fine point Sharpie pen. And I just made a little notch in one of the corners there, a notch in one of the corners. You could do this to every corner on every triangle, but I find it's more fun to just pick one corner on each of the big triangles, the triangles you made with the big Sharpie. Now I'm done with my ultra-fine point Sharpie pen. And now I'm ready to switch back to my pencil. And what I'm going to use the pencil for, I'm going to use the pencil to create some depth. To do that, what I want to do is shade the space behind and between the triangles. And a lot of times, to get into tighter spaces, I'll turn my paper so that it's a more comfortable angle for me to color in. I'm right-handed, so my hand naturally makes this movement. If you're left-handed, your hand will naturally make this movement. And so I just like to turn my paper so that when I'm shading, it's easier to get whichever space I need to shade in. And the same for drawing lines. A lot of times I'll turn the page to draw lines too. I didn't do that for my triangles because they were all really small lines. But especially if I have really big lines to make, really long lines, I'm pulling something like this, I'll make sure that I turn the paper whichever direction I need to go in order to get that easier for me. Since this is just a practice, we're going to do 6 different types of patterns, one in each of these 6 blocks. Speaking of which, while I'm finishing this, I want to talk to you about what the process for the next pattern is going to be. The second pattern, we're going to talk about another Zentangle term called auras. And an aura is simply a repeated shape, but around itself. Here, these repeated shapes are next to each other. It's a triangle next to a triangle, next to a triangle. Triangle, 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 triangle. But with an aura, which is what we're going to do here, in this second box, auras are when you have a shape around of another shape. Now I'm switching back to the Sharpie. I always like to start each pattern with a Sharpie. It really makes you force yourself to dive right into it. If you try to start with a pencil, then you're going to try to use an eraser. You're going to spend all your time erasing instead of actually drawing. And one thing we have to understand about a Zentangle is that, like I said, if you make little mistakes, no one's ever going to know because the whole pattern will swallow it up. In box number 2, I think I'm going to work under my curve here. In box number 2, we're going to be making an aura pattern. And instead of using triangles, we'll do circles this time. Kind of like polka dots. Leave a nice big space between them. And I'm just going to color these in, darken them up with my Sharpie. And what I'm going to do now, like I said, is make auras. An aura would be a shape around a shape. So this circle here, we've got a full circle. Let's make another full circle around that one. This one, we just see part of the circle, but we can imagine the whole circle is there. So we're making another circle around that circle. So right now I have one aura around each circle. Now I'm going to make a second aura around each circle. I don't want to keep going on one and then move to another. I want to do one layer around all of my circles and then come back for more. But if I make an aura around each of these 2 circles here, they're gonna touch each other right here in the middle. So instead of making 2 separate auras, I'm going to make one aura that curves around both of those circles. You see how there's a space here where they're touching each other, where they're combining into one aura. And now on the next layer, this is why I didn't want to do a bunch of auras around one circle, then skip over here and do a bunch of auras, then skip over here and do a bunch of auras. You can do that, but then they'll be overlapped. Here they merge. And now I'm at the point where all of them are going to start merging. So here, if I make another aura around these 2 circles here, it's going to include this one. So if I go here, it goes around there. And then when it's getting into this little space here, it's going to start wrapping around the 3rd circle. And then you can imagine it wraps around here, and then it's going to merge with the one from this circle. You can imagine it wraps around here, and it would merge with the aura from this circle. And it would wrap around here and merge with the aura from this circle. And it would wrap around here back to the 1st circle. But there would also be an aura in this space, because the aura from this circle would merge with this one, but then it would keep going here. And I think that's done. Now, again, I'm going to put the Sharpies away. When I switch back to the pencil, what I'm going to do here with this particular pattern is I'm going to shade in alternating auras. So this circle here has a white aura around it, and then I want to make a gray aura. Another great thing about Zentangles is that there's no wrong way to do them. I may want to color or shade every other aura. I may want black and then white, gray, white, gray, white, gray. But you may want to do something completely different with those auras. And that doesn't mean you're wrong. And it doesn't mean I'm wrong. And it doesn't mean either one of us is right. It just means you do what you want to do. And you lose yourself in the creation of your pattern. You figure out what you're going to do, and then you do it over and over and over. And that kind of leads me into what my favorite part of Zentangles is. And that is the way that as an artist creating it, the purpose, even though it does create a beautiful image in the end, the purpose is not to create a beautiful image. The purpose of a Zentangle is to lose yourself in the process and get in the zone, or as the name Zentangle would suggest, a Zen state. A Zen state just meaning you lose yourself in what you're doing. It's a meditative, focused state where all I'm worried about is creating this. And I'm repeating, doing the same thing again and again. And because I'm doing the same thing again and again and again and again, I lose myself, I lose track of time, and I get in the zone. Next, moving on to the third pattern. For the third pattern, I want to talk to you about something called juxtaposition. That's a big, long, fancy word, but it just means having vastly different things right next to each other. So what I'm going to do in maybe this area that wraps around the loop, I'm going to make some rectangles, because rectangles are very straight lines, and you see they're right next to this curved loop. Maybe a square up here. Oh, I guess that's more of a rectangle too. Maybe I want to have one that overlaps and kind of goes off the edge of the square there. And then I'm going to switch to my ultrafine point Sharpie pen again. And I'm going to make wavy lines in the background that overlap behind these rectangles. So here's a wavy line. And because these lines are wavy and they're right next to and touching and overlapping behind straight lines, it really gives a kind of clashing feel, like these two things are not wanting to merge together. It really makes the foreground pop out. The foreground here being the rectangles. By the way, if you're struggling with overlapping, if you're not sure how to do it, it's real easy. I draw until I bump into something, and then I jump over it, and then I keep going. Call it bumping and jumping. Bump, jump. That's how we overlap in Mr. News Art Room. There you go. That's called juxtaposition. You got this real straight line square or rectangle juxtaposed against the wavy lines in the background. Juxtaposing in your artwork can really help to make things pop, make things stand out. And so another thing I can do to help make these stand out is to change the value of either the foreground or the background. And I think what I want to do, just to help make these pop, is give them a little shadow. I could pretend that the light is kind of shining in from the top left, and I could give a shadow under the top right, under the bottom right, I'm sorry. And what I'm going to do for that is just kind of copy the same shape. It's like a little drop shadow. Again, copy the shape of it here and just put in a drop shadow, a cast shadow like this, like these rectangles are raised up off of the surface and there's a little shadow on the surface under them. That's not happening very much with my hand here because I got all these lights shining from different directions on my picture, but you get the idea. drops a little shadow on the space under it. And if we shade it with a pencil, you can still see those wavy lines, even though they've got this shadow drawn on them or shaded on them. And there you go. We're done with the third pattern. Moving along now to the fourth pattern, I think inside this loop we're going to create a pattern going with the ideas we learned here of foreground and background. There's a really fun pattern. I think it's one of my favorites. There's so many different Zentangle patterns you can make, and there's no wrong way to make them, so it's really hard to say what my favorite is, but this is one that I do very often when I create Zentangle images. You notice what I've done inside that loop there is I've just created two parallel lines, and there's very little space between them. They're very close together. Then I'm going to, at a different angle, overlapping behind those, make two more parallel lines that are very close together. Same distance apart as the others were. So it almost looks like there's a road with another road going under it, like there's a bridge here, an overpass of some kind. There. Next, I'm going to keep using the big Sharpie, and I'm going to color in or darken in the area behind or under or around these little roadways. But right now, all we're doing is darkening in the background. That will just really help make these bright white roadways, or whatever you want to call them, stand out. That's called contrast. The dark black against the bright white is called contrast. It's kind of like juxtaposition, or I should say juxtaposing is one way to create contrast. Contrast just means any way that you can use to make something stand out from what's around it. And in this case, it's value contrast. It's a dark value next to a light value. I'm switching now to the ultra fine point Sharpie pen because I've got these small spaces. I can much more accurately get them colored in black with the very fine point. And I can also get some of these corners a little tighter. All right, just like each one of these patterns, we're going to finish off with the pencil, and the last step for this pattern is just to give a little bit of a drop shadow, kind of like we did on this pattern. But wherever we've got two of these roadways overlapping, I'm going to make a shadow underneath the one that's on top. Whichever roadway is on bottom has a shadow on both sides, like that. The wider you make that shadow, the wider you make it, the more distance it looks like there is between them vertically. So it kind of looks like I'm looking down on a map, and I see this roadway goes over these two, and that's the shadow of this top roadway cast onto the roads underneath it. And then here again, cast a shadow onto that one. Great. Moving on now to the fifth pattern. So far, all of these other patterns have been what I call a fill pattern, where it fills all the edges. But this one, I want us to do a branch pattern that's going to come up from that corner and branch out. And I'm going to put this one away. I don't want to use the big Sharpie for this. Because I've got such a small space, I'm only going to use this tiny Sharpie, and I'm going to work my way out. And I don't even have to fill this whole space. I can choose which direction I want to branch out, but I'm going to start in this little corner. I'm going to make sort of a teardrop shape. If you kind of turn it upside down, it looks like a long stretched out teardrop. And notice that it came right from the corner at the bottom, and it looped up. Then that also makes another little tiny little V shape in here and on this side. and I can pick which way I want it to go, whether I want it to branch up and to the left or up and to the right. I think I want this one, since I already leaned it to the right, I want to kind of branch up and to the right with it. So in this space between this shape and this string, I'm going to make another one of these, and it can be the same size or smaller or bigger depending on how you want it to look. Again, another one of those teardrop, upside down teardrop shapes. Now this time I'm going to go into the space between those two that I just made, and I'm going to make a third, and I can do a fourth here between those two, and I can go outside of my bounds of this box because I can, because I'm an artist and I can choose. It's up to me. I don't have to stay inside this box. But if I had a square sheet of paper and I got to the edge of it, then obviously I'd have to stop. But here, I don't have to stop. I can keep going. And now the next one I can make either between these two, or between these two, or between this and the string, or between these two, or between this and the string. I could keep going in whichever direction I want. But I like to alternate. So I did one, I guess I'd call this the left, and then the right, and then the left, and then the right. So I'd go left again, and I'd come up through my letter E here. And then this way again. There's no wrong way to do it. But if you want, like I said, this is a branching pattern, I could branch out and make another section of it going this way, or another section of it going this way. Yeah, why not? I'll go ahead and show you that. I'll make another section going this way. Cool. And so you see it just kind of branches out, and it can go whichever direction you want it to go. And if you kind of curve those teardrops, you can make it go in lots of different directions. Okay, not done yet. I'm still using the ultrafine point Sharpie, and in each one of these teardrop shapes, I'm going to make a line that starts at the tip and comes through the middle, and then I like to kind of end it with some dots. Starts at the tip, comes through the middle, and then end it with some dots. And I leave a little space. I don't want it to go all the way to the end, all the way to the curve. I want it to kind of stop right in the middle of that curve. And you can make these dash lines. They don't have to be perfect. Again, each one of them is going to kind of be different. There's nothing wrong with that. It's the same idea. And I know there's some people who are so used to a math class and a math teacher who says, your pattern has to be exactly the same thing every single time. You can never change any part of it. But this isn't math. This is art. And a pattern in art really just means anytime you're repeating an idea or a concept, it doesn't have to be exactly the same thing repeating. So when you're in math class, do what your math teacher says. When you're in Mr. New's art class, make art. And just like all the other patterns, we're going to finish this up with a little bit of shading. And that just makes it look like those are kind of sitting on a surface. And now for the final pattern. I'm switching again back to the big Sharpie. And for this final pattern, I want to talk to you about mixing patterns together. Because one of the things that really makes Zentangles shine is when you mix patterns and have a pattern inside of a pattern inside of a pattern. So for this example, there's this pattern where I've got the circles with auras around them, and then they've got these bars connecting them. And then you can imagine there's other circles off the edges of the page being connected by the same bars. Then each one of these main circles has a different pattern, and each of these spaces between the bars connecting them has its own pattern. So a pattern inside of a pattern, what I call the meta pattern. There's no wrong way to do it. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you two completely new patterns, but still using similar ideas. Repetition of shapes, auras, juxtaposition, high contrast, foreground and background, and maybe some branching involved here too, but maybe not, we'll see. Now, If I wanted to be super simple, I could just color this like a checkerboard. So it's like black, white, black, white, black, white, black, white, boring, 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 boring. Or instead of black and white, I can do different types of patterns. I'm going to use two different patterns. For one of those patterns, all I'm going to do is make auras. So I guess I'll just start with this square here. Now this, I'm going to leave blank. I'm going to do a different pattern in that square. I'm going to still do it just like a checkerboard, where I alternate one pattern, the other, one pattern, the other, one pattern, the other, one pattern, the other. So I'm going to skip this one and then do auras inside this square. All right, so I think this is the last on my page that needs the aura inside of aura inside of aura pattern. Next, I want a different pattern to take up these spaces, the alternating spaces. I want it to be high contrast so that it looks like a checkerboard with black squares and white squares. I want it to have branching, would be really fun. I want it to have juxtapositions. This pattern has a lot of straight lines, so I want to use something with a lot of curved lines for this pattern in these squares. I want to have overlapping. Maybe instead of having a pattern that's here and then copy that same pattern here, maybe I want to have a pattern that goes under all of these squares. I think I'm going to change this one up. I think I'm going to do very similar to this, but change it up. So I'm totally making this up on the spot. It's just this same repeated shape, this teardrop, except I'm kind of curving them and having them kind of wrap around each other. So here's one that's going to overlap here, bump and jump, and bump, jump, there, shaded in black, perfect black. So we're not only getting the high contrast of the dark black against these white stripes here, but we're also getting the overlapping of these. We're also getting the juxtaposition of the curvy shape next to the straight shapes. Now, in art terms, these are called organic. These are called inorganic or geometric. Anything that's curved is what we call in art an organic shape. Anything that's got straight lines we call a geometric shape. Now, some artists will tell you that it's only called a geometric shape if it's something you would learn about in geometry, like a perfect shape, like, circle, square, triangle, rectangle. I disagree with that terminology. I think in art, you don't have to follow math rules. So if something is a geometric shape in art, that simply means that it uses straight lines and harsh corners. Whereas a shape that's organic would use curved lines and maybe have some points, some sharp points, but never straight lines with hard corners like that. Excellent. There you go. Done. All right, so there you have it. You are ready to start creating your own Zentangles. Congrats.